It was a time of sadness, oh my heart, though I knew to love the better part. And well I thought was given to me my test of faith and love to be. It seems that if I ne'er can be sure that faith to the end I shall endure, thus long nor trust to all his might, to walk by faith and not by sight. I thought the cross that I could bear, for its weight was heavy there. If I could lay my burdens down, I should not fear to lose my crown. Evening shadows seemed quite to tell, and weary though my spirit felt, for then there came a heavenly light, as to calm my raptured sight. Angelic music filled the air, as flighted deities tussled there. Then one who bade them bow the knee, the Lord came and stood and smiled at me. Come gently to me as I tremble lay, and follow me, he said, for I'm the way. Before me crosses of every shape appeared, more magnificent than mine I feared. But then I saw once a beauty to behold, with jewels encircling it in gold. Thought I, this will be one to wear, this one would be fine to bear. And so this little cross did I take, but the cross did tremble and shake. The sparkling jewels, fair they to see, for all too heavy was their weight for me. They may not be, I cried and looked again, for comfort then to ease my pain. But one by one I passed them by, till a lovely one that caught my eye.
So we're jumping to Greenville and the Promise, 1871. David Freese had a job waiting for him when he arrived in Greenville with his family, so he could support them before Amanda became a teacher there. Amanda planned to teach school in her home. When the school year began, she had everything ready. She had prepared the schoolroom for basement, gathered the wood for the potbelly stove to be used in winter, and gathered the books and supplies needed to begin the first year. Amanda Freese could hardly believe how time had passed. She looked at the stacks of papers in the basement schoolroom and sighed knowingly. On the walls were some of the pictures of the local children that had drawn as part of lessons, and some of the children left her thank you cards that they had made. She smiled as she looked through them. Greenville was a very nice town to live in, quiet and slowly expanding. Folks in the community came to her recently at the end of term, telling her that she should teach at the schoolhouse in town. She told them that even at the stupendous wage of $1.25 a month, she wouldn't take it. She liked teaching in her home. David came down into the basement and smiled. I figured you might be down here, closing things up for the year. Yes, well, there's still much to be done. Old Widow Henderson keeps trying to convince me it would be easier to teach in the schoolhouse, but I told her they have a teacher and I like it here. Not quite like back home, though, David nodded. Took us a bit to get settled, and here we are. This is a bigger house with more room and everything. We are doing fine here. Some of us are, she thought. Amanda feared for her daughter, who turned 15 not long ago, and that she was sometimes very sick. Estelle wants to be a teacher, following in my footsteps. Isn't that nice? I just wish she'd get better so she could enjoy her plans. Amen, David Freese nodded, sadly. That pesky Og has been bothering her more and more lately. Amanda knew that her small class looked up to her as a role model, and that being a teacher meant hard work and perseverance, not to mention abounding patience. She recalled the children by name and knew they would be back in the fall term. The community loved and respected her from the first term 4 years earlier. And then Estelle has a conversation with her brother Clarence, who I'm presuming is a little younger. In her bedroom in the house was Estelle Freese, age 15, seated on the edge of her bed, writing down something with unswerving focus and attention. She completed the last page of this writing and dipped the pen back into the inkwell at her nightstand. She was a very proper girl who went to the town church every Sunday judiciously and loved to write until sundown and then by candlelight. A cough stifled her movement as she turned toward the door. She hadn't taken the climate of Greenville. In those days, the town was near the swampland that tended to be mosquito-infested, as sometimes folks got sick from the ague, which is a sickness mosquitoes spread to people. Estelle had contracted this disease just shy of her graduation from high school, so she has malaria. That's what they now call malaria. In the adjacent bedroom was Clarence Freese. He was 13 and healthy, and didn't mind Greenville that much. He smiled as he looked up into his small closet. At the top of the closet was his silk hat from his grandfather that he'd left. He still had it. In the years since coming to Greenville, he still hadn't met a native, or did suspect that any would show up at any time soon. Estelle peered into his room as he was admiring the hat box in the closet, and he turned and showed him. "What do you want, Estelle?" he asked, a little abruptly. "I've written something I want you to read," she replied. She walked into the room, but lost most of her strength getting to his bedside. She shivered and sat down on the bed. "It's a poem." Clarence liked his sister's poems. They were smart and always had good spelling. He took the parchment from her and carefully looked it over. Each line seemed to him quite lovely. It was lyrical, like a hymn, and it reminded him of the church hymn. "It is very beautiful, a hymn to God. I would like you to keep it always, to remember me after I'm gone." Clarence smiled and folded the pages carefully. Then he went into a drawer of his dresser and found a wooden box. He opened it and placed the poem inside. "Are you afraid to die?" "No, I am not. I know that I'm dying and will soon go to heaven. I was hoping to hand it to the class, but I got sick last week and didn't get around to it." "I will keep it always, Estelle." Estelle composed herself and tried to get back up, but she felt faint and could not. "I should get back to my room." "I will help you," Clarence replied, and he helped her back to her room. "I'll put the poem box with Grandpa's hat, and it will never leave my sight." "That's very mannerly of you. I think that someday you will be a mannerly gentleman and marry a beautiful girl." "I hadn't thought of that," Clarence balked. "Ha ha! You might someday, dear brother. I want you to name your daughter after me." I really haven't thought of that." "I know, but promise me you will." "Oh, I promise. I will." Just then, Amanda and David came down the hall, and Amanda shook her head. "You shouldn't be out of bed, sweetheart. Now you've come in here and rest. Your brother can visit with you." "Yes, Mommy. I wanted to tell him something." "I figured, but you're in no condition to be walking around on your own." Amanda took her in her arms and helped her back into the bedroom. The colors of fall painted the town the shades of bright orange, yellow, and red. The mosquitoes were still out, which was unusual for the fall months. The lakes and the swamps near the town were especially infested, all through the previous year, and there wasn't much anybody could do about it. Estelle managed to survive for another year, but then it was fall, and she could still tell that her diploma paper and her certificates of graduation was displayed on the dresser when she could see them. Her mother was the only teacher she ever knew, and her graduation day had been celebrated in a sickbed, but she didn't. Her health was very poor, but she insisted on keeping up with her studies. Now that she had her diploma, she insisted on teaching in the fall. Amanda, her loving mother, was by her bedside that afternoon tending to her. The town didn't have a doctor back then, so it was up to her to tend to her. "I know how much you want to teach like I do, sweetheart. I'm very proud of you." Estelle smiled, her waxen face covered in sweat. She looked happy. Her mother was with her, despite the sickness. Between horrible coughing, she had moments of relief. During one such moment, she nodded. "I'm happy to be here another year, Mother. That's all I can hope for." "I love you, my precious Estelle." Then she kissed her daughter's forehead. She well knew of her daughter's dedication, and she was very sportive. Sadly, she wasn't able to get well, and things healthy young women can do. In turn, Estelle knew of her mother's unending devotion and love, which she had hoped to follow. The sickness ravaged her body, but her mind was still aptly working, and her thoughts were of a bright other place, where she would be well. The other children in the class had sent cards, and Amanda opened one to read it to her. "Would you like me to read it to you?" "Yes, I would." One day, Estelle's ague became increasingly worse, and she was coughing with a terrible fever. The town doctor was summoned, so they had a doctor at that. But he couldn't do anything for her. The family feared for Estelle. She seemed resigned to her illness. One day, Estelle's ague became increasingly worse, and she was coughing with a terrible fever. The town doctor was summoned, but he couldn't do anything for her. The family feared for Estelle, so she seemed resigned to her illness. Amanda came to her daughter beside her to comfort her. She called in a whimper, "I feel so weak, Mother. Kiss me." Her mother was filled with consternation. Her heart sank as she kissed her daughter. Over and over in her mind she thought, "This can't be. This cannot be." Estelle was dying. And it seemed that a leaf caught in the fall breeze. She was taken away. As dear Estelle passed away, Amanda Fries could only repeat over and over, "It can't be. It can't be." The Fries family believed in God and heaven, so they knew that Estelle's death meant an eternity with the Lord. She was in a better place. Estelle was only 16 when she passed away. Her name would go on, as Clarence had promised to keep her poem, and one day name his daughter after her. He kept his promise. The dance where Mom and Dad met. Greenville, 1880. Clarence Fries walked up the dusty road to his house. A cool breeze blew up from the north of the lake. He had his tool belt wrapped around his waist, dusty overalls, and a well-used hat. In fact, he was covered in dust and mud, not to mention spots of tree sap. His sturdy frame was filled out, and he wasn't a young man anymore. The dreams and aspirations he had were originally to be a teacher, as his sister once wanted to be. But he didn't have the patience to teach, nor did it pay enough to support him, as it turned out. "Mother, were you standing there this whole time?" His mother, Amanda, was standing on the porch as he approached. "No, I went inside after you left this morning, bright and early. How did the apprenticing go?" "Fine. The loggers brought in new timbers for us to haul out to Louis Kuiper's place. They want us to begin building a house." "Well, son, even if you aren't a teacher, you are bound to learn something in the trades." Amanda regretted that her boy didn't like teaching, but she gave him her blessing when he made his new choice. She recalled the day 4 years earlier, like it was yesterday, and smiled knowingly. "Someday I could be teaching, but not school teaching. I could be a journeyman and teach apprentice carpenters." "That'd make me proud also," Amanda smiled. "Now you get washed up before you come in with all those filthy clothes. I'll put out some clean ones on the line for you to look proper during supper." Clarence nodded and walked around to the back to go into the wash basin. After supper, Clarence went to his room. On his nightstand was his photograph from graduation, taken by the town photographer. He also had his diploma pinned to the wall near the bed, yellowing at the corners. He looked at the room with a more experienced and skeptical eye than before as he was now a carpenter's apprentice, and noted that he could name all of the fancy names for different kinds of braces, beams, and wall hangings. He happened to glance up at his closet, and before he knew it, he opened the door and pulled down the dust-covered old hat box, and the smaller brown box where the letter his sister gave him was kept. Clarence thought for a moment about the old hat also, and that someday he would pass it on to his son, if he had one. He couldn't conceive of a time when he might be as old as Grandpa Fries, who was long ago had passed on. He recalled what his sister had said, I think that someday he would be a mannerly gentleman and marry a beautiful girl. And he said, "I hadn't thought of that," he balked. She laughed, even though it hurt a little to do so. "You might someday, dear brother, and I want you to name your daughter after me." As he thought about it for a moment, he figured that even if he had a daughter, and no sons, and one of them might be named Estelle, that she might inherit the hat also. Having children seemed such a distant thought, and having grandchildren like another lifetime away. The small hamlet of Greenville was in a slow state of growth over the last few years, with people coming in but not staying, as they came from all over, mostly for logging work up north. With the coming of new settlers, carpenters would be needed. Clarence completed his apprenticeship in carpentry in the year 1880, when he was finally ready to work in the trade full-time. In that year, people were moving into town and needed homes built. So, Clarence looked forward to a new and promising future. Okay, one evening he came home according to his routine, but something was different. The horse and buggy were set out in front of the house, and his parents were dressed up for Sunday service. This was unexpected, as he'd forgotten the occasional box socials that were held at the Congregational Church. The events didn't happen too often, and up until that evening, he hadn't really thought about attending one. So it's kind of like a Sadie Hawkins dance. Just No. David smiled. His father was old, turning gray. He looked like a miserly prospector from the Western pulp stories, and had clearly earned his years. Amanda looked stately, climbing up in years alongside her husband. She dressed in a fashionable outfit, even when it wasn't a special occasion, so she was a respectable lady. Clarence wondered why his parents were dressed up more than usual. "I know you two are up to something, so what is it?" Amanda smiled to her son and told him, "Tonight we are going to go to the box social, and would like for you to attend with us. Who knows, maybe you might meet some pretty lady and share supper with her. What do you say?" At first, Clarence was reluctant. After all, his mother was asking him to go out of his way and do something different that night. "Well, Mother, I have work to do, but since it's you, I'll go," he replied, and he was a little shy. The family piled into the wagon. With a crack of David's horsewhip, the horse responded, and the buggy began to move. The cool evening air was humid, and the smells of nearby trees and lakes filled the senses. It was spring, so flowers along the road were in bloom, and insects buzzed overhead. The Congregational Church was a short distance down the dirt road, and the townspeople were gathered for the social event already, as the buggy arrived. The family parked the buggy and hitched up the horse to the hitching post. Then they walked into the candlelit narthex. Many people from town were talking and milling about. The box social was a nice way for men to meet women. Each lady would make a pretty wrapped box, as fine as she could make, with a bow on it. It was usually made from a shoebox. Inside the box, she would put a small meal. Then she would have the box put up for auction, and the men would pick the box and would get a meal, and the company of a lady for the evening. Clarence didn't have any special person in mind, so he didn't try to guess which box belonged to whom and which girl. Instead, he concentrated on two things: which box took his fancy, and more importantly, which box might come at his price limit of 75 cents. He found out early in the bidding that 75 cents was the average price. Twice he was outbid. One time a box went for the sky-high price of $1.50. Nothing on earth would have induced him to spend that much of his hard-earned money on supper. Also, he was starting to have misgivings about the whole process. What if a fussy older woman, auctioned the box he had bid on, rather than someone closer to his age? Not that he could recall hearing about that ever happening. He asked his mother about the girls preparing the boxes, and she told him that they were single and eligible. But she neglected to tell him how old. He certainly didn't want to be the first fellow in that predicament. Maybe the girl would be shy and really boring to talk with, or perhaps she might be the reverse and scare him to death. He was beginning to wish he had never come. It was just that as at the very moment he won the bid on a beautiful blue box with a darker blue tie on it. The box had sparkling little spots on it also. All the men lined up with their purchases to be picked out by the ladies. Clarence noticed that there were some men and some women younger than he was, and some older, but nobody was really very old to this young man. Old was anyone his parents' age. Nobody in the auction appeared to be over 30. The girls claimed that their boxes and their companions for the evening. And who could mine be, Clarence wondered. The ladies all had lovely hairstyles, Clarence observed. It was also of high fashion to wear large, beautifully curled ostrich plumes on wide-brimmed hats. Dresses were beautifully draped and ruffled, and it often took 20 to 25 yards of material to make one. The material was something. Heavy silk that would stand up alone when broidered in rich velvets. It was elegant. No wardrobe was complete without velvet, plumed hats, or silk. All the ladies carried fans, and some of them were very expensive. Clarence paid attention to what the girls were wearing, but not what the men were dressed as. His Sunday clothes were not elegant or stylish, but they served their purpose. His sense of style was simple, and he didn't really know a lot about it. He was quite upset about who might be his girl for the night, but suddenly the prettiest girl he had ever seen approached. She looked very elegant in a red silk dress, all trimmed with lace, although he knew little about fashion for the opposite sex. He sensed that the girl was dressed in the height of style. He was ashamed and quite startled when she spoke to him. In fact, she had to ask him twice. "My name is Lucinda Smith. What is yours, please?" He paused, breathless and unable to remember his own name. He introduced himself with a stammer in his voice he'd never recalled he had before. "Clarence Freese?" So that was when Clarence Freese met Lucinda Smith for the first time. Clarence began to learn a little about his new friend, Lucinda, each Sunday. He was beginning to suspect she liked him a little. "Hello, Lucinda. Fine night, isn't it?" Lucinda had a girlfriend named Ada, who looked somewhat like her in height and coloring. I'm assuming, like, pale, "I'm Ida." Ida smiled. She was always assuming gentlemen were talking to her, not Lucinda, and she had to address them directly. Lucinda turned at the moment, catching her friend under the arm. "Now, Ida, quit confusing the boy." "Ah, but the look on his face," she giggled. "I wasn't all that confused," Clarence smiled, a wry and mischievous grin. "Shall I escort you into the circus hall?" "Yes, sir." And Ida took the other arm. They went inside, as Clarence thought ladies sure like to make courting difficult for a gentleman, with all their coyness. The ladies, Lucinda and Ida, were together always. As Clarence wanted to be with Lucinda for the evening to talk, he had to include Ida. Now, in those days, everyone was a lady or a gentleman, so when they met, they were proper and mannerly, as was the custom. Lucinda was 17, as was Ida. Their mothers said they were alike as two peas in a pod. One Sunday evening after church services, sometime later, Clarence asked his usual question. Clarence was growing tired of having to include Ida in their talks, and he didn't at all first know how to subtly explain it to her. "Could I escort you and your girlfriend to Lucinda?" "Could I escort you and your girlfriend home, Lucinda?" "That would be fine," she replied. The evening seemed perfectly normal to him. Clarence thought and thought about what he might talk to Lucinda about the matter. Ida appeared at the church vestibule and smiled. "Would you be taking me home first?" She lived farther away than Lucinda, so he usually escorted her home and then went back for Lucinda. "I'll be right here when you get back," said Lucinda. Clarence walked Ida home without a word, and then returned to the church, where he found Lucinda still standing near the vestibule. Lucinda's pretty dark eyes danced in the lamplight around the building. "You wanted to talk to me?" "Yes. I know that we've been spending a lot of time walking together, and I've made a decision. I want to walk just with you as you escort me from now on. I know Ida's your friend and all, but I don't want to have two ladies to escort." Well, of course, Cowpoke's doing a narration. That makes perfect sense. Yee-hoo! But yes, Lucinda was a little surprised, but she composed herself. "I understand. What do you think, Lucinda?" "That's fine with me, Clarence." She put her arm in his arm. "Shall we go?" She knew Ida would understand also. Truth be told, she was hoping to spend time with him. Oh my. A gift from grandfather. Greenville, 1882. The family that had set up all of Tom Turner's children for adoption nearly 20 years ago had passed on. One of the children, the eldest boy, Tom Turner, found himself back in Greenville, Michigan, nearly 18 years after he was adopted. At first he stood there where the old cabin had stood. It was his first stop in Greenville when he was a boy, but it was torn down to build a fancy new farmhouse, and he suspected that old Pete and his wife sold it years ago. A simple, modestly dressed man with a hat walked up to the side of the house. "Whom are you looking for, mister?" "I once lodged with him when I was a boy." I think the lady that sold this place was Widow Henderson, but I didn't know if her husband is named Pete or not." "Thanks, but can you tell me something about Porter Smith?" "3 Smith families live here in these parts. We'll have to be more specific." Can you direct me to them, kind sir?" "Well, yes, they're over by the church." He pointed to a white building in the distance. You can't miss them. Whole row of Smith houses. As he walked down the block, a fine spring day, he was becoming concerned he might never find the address he was looking for. The little town had 3 Smith families, and he had been to 2 of them without much luck. He didn't have much time to enjoy the hospitality of Greenville as a young boy. He came to Michigan with his brother Harry and his sisters Grace, Maud, and baby Lucinda. His mother died, followed by his father, a month later. He had his father's face, but his mother's eyes. Having grown up into an honest, hard-working man, he came to call upon his long-lost siblings. Still, he figured that he was a stranger in town, so he had to be cautious. Sitting on the porch-top step of the family home sat Lucinda, a bit exasperated at the warming of the spring day. She noticed the tall, handsome man with the dusty-colored yellow hair next door, knocking with vigor, and no one responding to come to him. Tempted to say something, she thought about what the neighbors might think, and thought against it. She happened to know what the neighbors that he was trying to get a hold of to notice him were out. Other neighbors might be walking around about to notice, and she thought, with a hint of nervousness, she was engaged to marry, and in those days a woman engaged to marry did not talk to strangers. It would be considered forward to say anything to the man, she thought. She knew the people in town, and did not think it right for a man a little older than her to be walking around knocking on doors. Besides, he was getting closer to her house. And the young man, tired of knocking, stood for a moment. Then he pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and looked at it carefully. Before Lucinda could make a hasty retreat, the young man approached her and very politely inquired of her, "Miss." Lucinda didn't know what to do. He addressed her. She thought that it seemed kind of sudden. But since he asked, he wasn't being forward, and she was obliged to reply cordially. "Yes." She looked at him a bit flustered. "Excuse me, but could you tell me, please, where I could find the family by the name of Porter Smith?" Lucinda blinked. "That's my family, kind sir." "Could you be so kind as to bring them to the door? I have some important business to discuss, as I have come from a long way off to see them." Sally, her mother, happened to hear the talking on the porch and approached to see what was going on. "I'm Sally Smith, sir. May I help you?" "Mrs. Smith, I am Tom Turner, Jr., although I now just go by Tom Turner since my father died a long time ago." Lucinda was more flushed and her cheeks turned red, and she had a feeling inside that she recalled the stranger somehow. She couldn't quite place it. Now, where have I heard that name? She wasn't too keen on remembering old names, but she recalled something. Tom was anxious to see if the name meant anything to either of them. He looked first at one and then the other, and could see they did not recognize him. "Come in and sit down," said Sally Smith. Then she introduced her daughter. "This is my daughter, Lucinda." At that, the young man became very excited. He began talking rapidly. "I'm looking for a Lucinda Smith, who was born Lucinda Turner. She was adopted into this family 15 years ago, to my recollection. Sally has always been my mother, although it is strange." Lucinda had a look of reckoning, all of a sudden. "Stronger than before. You seem familiar to me." "I am your brother." "My brother?" Lucinda gasped. "Well, you were only a baby, but it's possible you could tell it's me." Lucinda gasped. "I didn't even know I had a brother." Sally realized there was a familiarity in him that she didn't see before. "Why, you are Tom Turner's son. He's the man who died so many years ago, and we took in his youngest." She looked at Lucinda. "You, dear." Lucinda looked a little startled and said, "Are you sure about this, Mother?" Sally nodded. "I'm becoming more sure by the moment. Tell me, Tom, what brings you here?" "Tom Turner, my father, left an estate with a substantial bit of money you're entitled to. He's been gone for 18 years now. He explained that the money had been put in a trust until the youngest child reached 18 years of age, and since Lucinda was recently 18, she was entitled to her share. The money was to be divided among the 5 children, and each would get $200. That was a lot of money in 1882. You see, Lucinda, we all get the money only when all of us 5 are accounted for, and you were the last one. I searched everywhere." Lucinda's eyes widened. "I have other brothers and sisters?" "Yes, you have another brother and 2 sisters." It was the first time Lucinda had heard of such a thing, and it became quite a shock. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Lucinda and her family were so excited that they weren't listening to Tom anymore. "It is true, and in addition, "You have $200, Tom Turner stated at last. Lucinda began to be overcome and said, "I can't believe it. $200. Sally nodded with approval. "You must stay for supper with us tonight, Mr. Turner." "I would be honored, Mr. Smith," Tom replied. "That is supper," he told them more of the details, and repeated that he was the eldest brother and that the money would be distributed among the siblings. Lucinda discovered that she had a family she didn't even know about, and he had parents from long ago, which she had gathered from what her mother told her. Old man Porter Smith, who was the town pastor, was in his later years, but it was said that he would never really retire. He greeted Tom as he walked into the room with a warm smile. "You don't look much like Lucinda, but I suspect you do look like your father more." "Lucinda looks a little bit like our mother. I remember what she looked like. She had these beautiful dark eyes." "You must have been very young when your parents passed on," Porter nodded. "I was just barely 10, sir." Porter smiled before he put out his Bible, which he carried around all the time. "While dinner's being prepared, tell me about yourself and the others." Lucinda hurried to the kitchen nervously. "I'm a farmer. Harry, my brother, is a minister, and Grace lives on a farm. Maud also lives on a farm. They live all around the state." "Well, it's a fine thing you have a minister for a brother," Porter nodded. "Farming is fine, too. It's a noble profession. However, ministering interests me because, after all, I'm the minister." "How long, may I ask, sir?" "Over 20 years I've been the head pastor and minister at the local Congregational church." "Why, I bet my congregation $5 if they could read the Bible cover to cover in a year." "That's a lot of money." "Nobody's ever claimed it." During the meal, Tom explained what he was raised. "I was taken in by a young farm couple that brought me up. I worked hard for them all of my life, and at the age of 21, Pa gave me a new suit of store clothes, $25, and released me of my obligations." He explained that he had a very good job and was hoping to have a very fine future. One day he wanted to be married and have a family of his own. On his way out, Tom mentioned that he planned to get married, now that he had his inheritance. He turned to his sister. "I don't suppose that money means that much to you." Lucinda replied, "Oh, it means a lot to me. I can use it to buy my wedding fixins. I hope you can stay for my wedding." "I wouldn't miss it," Tom replied. "Good night to you all." He bowed and he left. For a Greenville wedding. Greenville, April 19th, 1882. The magic of springtime often turned people to thoughts of fancy, of joy, and love, and so it was not surprising that the wedding happened the time of year. So Clarence Freese and Lucinda Smith were getting married. Pretty dark-eyed Lucinda wore a plum-colored taffeta gown, which was very lustrous indeed, and required 25 yards of material to make. The dress was ruffled and flounced. It was tight-fitting sleeves and lace of the wrists, and a long collar of gossamer lace that extended to the waist. Clarence was handsome in his first brand-new cutaway, a fine wedding outfit that he had a gold watch chain dangling at one side. He stood proud and happy at the bride's side, and Clarence, his big blue eyes set wide in his Germanic face. He had grown a mustache that was dark red, curiously, and in contrast to his dark brown hair. He looked docile and benevolent, but sure of himself and his ideas. The gala day was a full wedding and reception, held at the Smith house, situated next to two other Smith houses on the block. 50 people attended the wedding. Even a U.S. congressman was there, and he had the pleasure of being born in Greenville, and he wished the couple well, and although they would have a credit in the community. The guests expected prosperous times ahead, and wished them well. The Smiths were on the bride's side, and the Freeses on the groom's. Back then, all of the weddings were held at the church chapel, and it was spring, and there were too many bugs to have it outside. Officiating the wedding was Pastor Smith himself, and he found it somewhat amusing that he had to both give the sermon and his bride away. The bridegroom was a nice, sturdy-built man with a fine occupation as a carpenter. Clarence Leslie Freese looked quite happy to be getting married, although initially he thought all the trimmings and extra fussing about was a hassle. The bride, Lucinda Smith, would become Mrs. Clarence Leslie Freese, and all during the wedding service she kept saying to herself, "Miss Freese, Mrs. Freese." It was like a chant, and when she thought about the name, it was like a dream. Most of the wedding gifts were silver, such as silver platters, silver cake plates, and silver spoons made of pure silver. Oh, that's fancy. The silver spoons were very light, almost as if they weren't there. And then, when one picked them up, among the wedding gifts also was a document, and all the guests wondered what it was written on it. After a time, the guests talked in increasing whispers about it. So the bridegroom's father asked for his son and thought of it as a good time to explain it. The bridegroom walked over to the marble-topped table with many gifts on it fitted to capacity and removed the document. Then he announced what was on the document. "This is a deed for 90 acres of land, purchased for me by my father as our wedding present." The land was just a block or so from the dirt road to Turk Lake and the Flat River, and was named for a grove of trees. All of the guests were elated to the news, and they wanted to know what he planned to use it for. Some wanted to know where it was and what was on it, while others thought he might farm it. Clarence told them, "I have no intention of being a farmer. The land consisted mostly of virgin timber, and he made definite plans as to what to do with it." Then he did not tell them that the land was first purchased by his father when he came to Michigan from New York State, and that it came to him exactly $1 an acre. The little photographer set up his camera to take the wedding picture. In such a small town as Greenville, it was common for people in specific trades to keep doing what they had been doing for years. The old man remembered Lucinda from when she was a child, not to mention a whole lot of other people. The old man comes up and goes, "I remember when you were a wee little mite," he said. He laughed. Lucinda was a little embarrassed that the photographer recalled when she was a young girl, but she didn't raise a fuss about it. She just smiled and waved politely before it was to stand with her new husband. And then Clarence said, "This is also going to go in the town paper as an official announcement," Clarence informed her. "Our wedding is going to make the papers. Does it have to?" She said, "Sure it does. Now get ready to hold still, folks." The photographer pulled the black cape over his camera and himself to protect the film from being exposed. Then he clicked the shutter button. The picture was taken. Then later, the family and friends of the happy couple congregated there, and someone announced, "Presenting Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Freese." Yay! The Freese family, Greenville, 1887. After the wedding, Clarence and Lucinda were invited to move in with the Porter and Sally Smith, since Clarence was not yet able to support his new wife and family on the salary he got as a beginning carpenter. When he told his mother that he planned to one day teach carpenters, he didn't realize how hard it would be just to do that. When his list of customers increased 5 years later, they were still living with the Smiths. Yeah, there's a missing line. Lucinda's parents. He was also in no position to lend other carpenters. He was also in no position to lead other carpenters, as he thought he might be, as he was barely enough time. It should say has. Wow, there are some interesting typos in here. He was also in no position to lead other carpenters, as he thought that he might be, and he was barely had enough time for his own duties. Springtime was again upon the sleepy little town of Greenville, and the blossoms of the season were everywhere. And the colors of the season seemed to be timeless, for every year the blossoms returned. The beautiful colors, even the emptiest places, seemed full of life. The spot of land that had been set up for them wasn't yet occupied, as Clarence hadn't built anything on it, but the underbrush grew in it, and to fill in the open space. He had to get his skills up before taking on an entire home for his family. He spent most of the 5 years trying to provide for his growing family. The Frees had 2 children. Daniel, now age 4, was a sturdy boy with coal-black hair. In those days, boys were a durable kind of pullover outfit, kind of like a dress. It seemed to them that Daniel needed the next size up about every month or so. Daniel had a 2-year-old sister called Little Doll. In fact, her Christian name of Elva was so seldom used that some family friends had forgotten that was ever her name. Little Doll was an elven type, small since her birth, a difficult one that claimed the life of her twin, Etna. Little Doll was so nicknamed because she reminded people of a delicate Dresden doll. Little Doll's hair was red. At last, Clarence had began to work on his new home, on the 90 acres of land. He was so proud of himself that he decided to do something for his wife that he bought her a sewing machine. In those days, getting a sewing machine was a big deal, and she was quite thankful to get it. After all, clothes had to be made, as the family had not gone out After all, clothes had to be made, as that the family could not go out and buy clothes. Only the rich could buy clothes, and they were certainly not rich. Lucinda found that she loved to sew and reveled in making clothes for the family. She was sewing at her beloved machine one afternoon when her concentration was interrupted by a knock at the front door. She stopped with the machine and peeked through the silk curtains of the window and provided a view of the front porch. 3 people stood there, one of them looking vaguely familiar, but she was sure that she had never met before or seen the one. 3 people stood there, one of them looking vaguely familiar, but she was sure that she had never before seen the one astute gentleman, the rather primly dressed young lady, at his side. Lucinda thought about not answering the door. She felt that she looked disheveled after having been so long at the sewing machine, and was not in the mood to welcome unannounced strangers. Maybe they would think that nobody was home and would just go away. She had to give up this hope as the strangers pounded persistently on the door. Finally, she went to the door and opened it, but she looked disconcerted a little. Tom, Lucinda realized, was losing his hair. In just about 5 years, looked different than he used to, much older. "I'm your brother Tom, Lucinda, and this, my dear, is my younger brother Harry Turner, with his bride Lillian." A delighted smile spread across Lucinda's face as Tom told Harry that this was his baby sister. A delighted smile spread across Lucinda's face as Tom told Harry that this was his baby sister. "I can hardly believe it. This is such a surprise," she said excitedly. Harry, Lucinda noted, was dressed rather elegantly in a frock coat. "You are quite striking, Mrs. Lucinda Fries," he said. Then Tom said, "She does have her mother's eyes." He smiled. "I told you." Lillian Turner was lovely looking. His wife was attired in the fashion of the day, a dress with a basque waist and a dramatic skirt with huge flounces. "I'm Lillian Turner, Harry's wife." Lillian Turner was lovely looking. His wife was attired in the fashion of the day, a dress with a basque waist and a dramatic skirt with huge flounce. "I'm Lillian Turner, Harry's wife." Lucinda nodded. "Welcome to my home." The flounced state she was in had evaporated. Tom was holding his hat and he placed it in the hat rack and watched as his brother and wife went inside past him. Lucinda went to seek her mother, who had been watching the children in another part of the house, and brought her into the room. Introductions were made and all around, and everyone was invited to the parlor. Harry seemed the most at ease with them at all, and he explained that he was an ordained minister. Lucinda decided that this explained his easy mannerisms and dress. "After I was appointed to his first parish, I decided that I was there in good position to marry and establish a home with my fiancée of many years. I have, in fact, just recently wed." Then the other said, "I was anxious to meet my sister before I settle in to a strenuous life as a minister. This is kind of my honeymoon." Lucinda nodded and sipped an afternoon tea. What a strange way to spend a honeymoon. Lillian smiled a bit. "I used to be a school teacher, but I can still be as a good minister's wife, teaching the children. I hope the parishioners approve of me." "They will," Harry said. "You'll see." When Clarence came home that evening, he was surprised and pleased to meet his new relatives. The first thing that he said was, "I hope that you can stay for supper and then spend a few days here with us." Tom confessed, "Well, kind sir, that's exactly what we had in mind." Everyone smiled and fell into relaxed chatter, as Lucinda and her mother bustled about making supper and planning sleeping arrangements for their guests. As dinner was cooking, the Turners were introduced to their nephew and niece, Daniel and Little Doll. Harry made a point of inquiring of her Christian name. Just as supper was being put on the table, Lucinda's elderly father came home and was also pleased to meet the guests. Grandpa Porter Smith, at 74, was a slight, sparely built man, with a long, flowing white beard, well, not the actor here, and mischievous blue eyes. No longer Pastor Porter Smith, he was considered Grandpa, and likewise Mrs. Sally Smith was Grandma. Grandpa Smith had been retired from pastoring for a few years and usually took command of the dinner table conversation, being very loquacious. "Now you all have met our minister guests will do all the speaking, since I have done a fair amount of it in my day." Harry chuckled. "Ministering requires a great deal of talking to the masses. I would imagine that after so much time, you've become good at speaking, sir." "Yes, sir, I have. I'm proud of these things. My lovely daughter, and I've never missed a day of church in 50 years. Now please tell us about your church, Harry. Harry continued, I would be pleased. We live in a small town, a bit like this one, up north of it. And we have a church just starting. Only 14 people in it, so it isn't as large as yours. My church started out with only 5 people, counting me. But the Lord has blessed us with evangelism, and we brought in almost 60. Well, in recent times, it's dropped a little. Then the other guy says, the Lord works in mysterious ways, Harry smiled. The next day, Clarence showed his new relatives where he was building his new home. He stood before them as they stood around the gathering, the cut timbers, and the foundation was taking shape, but the building wasn't started yet. I've drawn up the blueprints myself. I'm going to complete the house over the next several years, where I can spare the time and the money. Harry nodded. This should be a nice house once it's built. Clarence went on to explain how the house was going to look and where the rooms would be once it was completed. He was going on for some time, and guests were running out of complacency. Porter walked up to him and smiled. All the building talk aside, son, I think it's time we go to the photographer and get a family portrait. Yes, we're going to be late, Tom noted, looking at his pocket watch. They had planned to get a picture taken that day, and Clarence loved to talk, and during all hours. Finally he stopped, and it seemed for a moment that it was silent. His face contorted, the notion of silence for more than a minute, and he caught himself wincing into the sun. Yeah, that's a good idea. Lucinda shook her head. He doesn't like it when it's quiet. I see that. They had planned to get a picture taken that day, and Clarence loved to talk. He had been for hours. Finally he stopped, and it seemed for a moment that it was silent. His face contorted at the notion of silence for more than a minute. But he caught himself wincing into the sun. Yeah, that's a good idea. Lucinda shook his head. He doesn't like it when it's quiet. So I see, said Harry. The family and their guests walked to the wagon and piled into it to get the photography studio in town. They could have walked, but the wind was picking up, and they didn't want dust to get all over their clothes. So it was they that was brushing off their clothes for a few minutes on the way. The horses whinnied, and the wagon began to move. 14 rooms, but no closets. Greenville, 1889. The Freese family was prospering through the seasons of another year. Clarence had a lot of carpentry work to be done, and Lucinda raised the children. They had more children. Little Daniel at 6, and little Doll at 4. The children had a new baby sister, and her name was Pearl Esther. The new house was nearing completion, and Clarence was about to move his family into it. He worked at his carpenter's trade 12 hours a day, from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. 6 days a week. He was paid $2 a day at the time, and there was no such thing as overtime pay. He worked on his own house on the outside from 7 in the evening until it was too dark to see, and then did inside work under the lights of kerosene lamps. He placed the kerosene lamps around in strategic places for better light and worked until midnight. They didn't have electricity back then. His house consisted of 14 rooms. The woodwork was all oak wood. Clarence had a supply of hand-carved 4-inch square blocks, which he planned to insert in the 4 corners of all of the window frames and door frames. That's typical of that time period. It had taken him years to carve intricate floral designs into these blocks. The blueprints called one room a library, but it actually became the back sitting room and was used by all the family when they played games in the evening, such as cards, checkers, and chess. The room was different from the others in that instead of baseboards, it had woodwork all around the room, from floor to a height of 50 inches. The woodwork was comprised of 2-inch wide strips, patiently cut with a handsaw. The strips were cherry, oak, and maple, each repeating for a pattern all the way around the room. They were highly varnished. The effect made for a beautiful room. The only day that Clarence didn't spend time working on the new house was Sunday, because to do so was unheard of, bordering on sacrilege. Not only that, with a long Sunday service, was also Sunday school following the service. During one such service, barely audible giggling increased in pitch until it became necessary for the minister to announce from the pulpit that he would appreciate the attention of the congregation. When the Freeses looked around to try and pinpoint the disturbance, they received glares from the parishioners in the row behind them. Then they noticed that their son Daniel had slipped away from his seat beside them. Clarence looked at one of the parishioners, who obviously had something to complain about. "What can be the problem, madame?" "Kind sir, your little boy is turned about making faces at us." Another person happened by. Their complaint caught his attention. "He was pinching my leg." "Daniel, you've been a bad little boy," Lucinda scolded. Daniel looked up with his big dark eyes and whimpered. "Don't give me that look," Lucinda continued. The person who first complained smirked stoically. The person who had first complained smirked stoningly. Smirked stoningly. Good God. The person who had first complained smirked stoically. "Restrain your children and give them a good disciplining, or I just don't know what." "I didn't do nothing," Little Doll protested. "It was Daniel." Daniel stuck out his tongue. "Stop that!" Lucinda turned to him. "I've never been so mortified. We're going home." Daniel whimpered as he led away. Clarence decided that he should not take the children to church from that moment on, as he put them in the buggy. "I don't think we should be bringing the children to church services until they're older and more behaved." Lucinda nodded as Daniel was whimpering and the girl children were pouting. "Yes, but it was only Daniel. Too bad his behavior has ruined it for the rest of us. I must have done something wrong raising him." Clarence grabbed the reins. "I don't think we did anything wrong, Lucinda. Boys act different, that's all." "I'm sorry, Mommy," Daniel whimpered. Well, on the way home, Clarence figured out that he had the perfect plan. He was going to watch the children, especially Daniel, while Lucinda attended church and the good children. It would also give him a chance to work on the house. Word got back to Clarence that the neighbors were complaining about his working on Sunday, but he chose to ignore them at first. One neighbor took it upon himself to visit Clarence while he was working on the house and tell him how worried he was about him. The neighbors were afraid that if he continued to work on a Sunday, he wouldn't go to heaven. Clarence would just give them a wry look with a twinkle in his eye and thank them for their concern. "Still," he added, "I'm not ready to go to heaven yet. I'm in a hurry to finish what I'm going to be finishing first." Then he continued the construction. The colors of autumn were brilliant with warm reds, yellows, and oranges. It had been several months since the incident at church, and the progress of the house was completed. The Frieses moved into their new home, and what a momentous occasion it was. All of the grandparents came to help out with the moving. Clarence rented a wagon and a horse from the livery stable, and it would expedite some of the moving of the larger pieces of furniture, while one parent or other had donated. Lucinda's parents, the Smiths, insisted that she take her organ with her. It was the most admired of all of their possessions. He had built the house according to his own design and plans, and he had not consulted Lucinda about any of its features. Therefore, she was understandably disappointed when she moved in and realized, after going upstairs and down several times, that there wasn't a closet in the whole house. "Clarence, come here!" "What's the matter, dear?" "Closets! The house doesn't have any closets." I thought we wouldn't need them." "Clarence, where are we going to put the clothes?" "Well, I suppose we could get some wardrobes, or I could build some." "I can't believe it. You forgot the closets." Sorry. He had fastened a lot of hooks and driven heavy nails into a wide board behind the kitchen stove, and he'd set heavy coats could be hung onto them before the wardrobes came. This was planned as a temporary expedition, but later, when the wardrobes came, the nails were still used. They weren't neat, but they were so handy that Clarence just thought the arrangement was justified. Since the house was so large, the Fries had very little furniture to put in it at first. But this didn't worry Clarence in the least. He said in good time that things that they needed could be added by degree, and he planned to make a lot of the furniture himself, and so he had time to do so. He drew up the plans, and the first piece of furniture he built was a large and commodious kitchen cupboard. This was his own idea of what a cupboard should be, and as usual, he did not consult with anyone about it. Since he had built 10-foot ceilings, he wanted the cupboard to be 8 feet wide and 8 feet high. The upper third of the cupboard had glass doors, and the center shelves partitioned off for dishes. To their right were shelves for medicine storage, and the opposite side was for the same size cabinet for items like baking soda and vanilla. Why is it so tall? I don't know. The bottom of the cupboard had deep drawers, and on one side was a sheet metal lined bin for about 100 pounds of sugar, and on the other side was the same size sheet metal lined bin for 100 pounds of flour. In the exact center was a row of small drawers that Clarence also lined with sheet metal. He carved the. In the exact center was a row of small drawers that Clarence also lined with sheet metal. He'd carved the words on each drawer of what was to go in them, such as salt, cinnamon, nutmeg, etc. The house included several freeze touches, as is his other homes, but his special home was the one where his family was to live in for generations. "It is finished," Clarence chuckled to himself. Lucinda at his side nudged him. "Quite a house we have here." It was Sunday morning, bright and early, and Clarence prepared the horse and buggy. And Clarence and his family moved into their home on schedule, and eventually he decided on bringing Daniel to church again to give him a second chance of redemption. Lucinda was a little skeptical. "The house is wondrous and so huge. How do we fill it all? I'll begin building furniture to go inside it, but for now, I think it's time we go to church. But do you think the children are ready?" "Yes, dear. I figure Daniel will just have to be watched closer. As for the girls, they don't do anything." "All right then," Lucinda nodded. "We'll go back. But as you're right about Our Lady's behaving, but I don't want any more trouble from Daniel." "I won't be any trouble, Papa," Daniel smiled. His wry grin told of an entirely opposite notion in his head. The family walked toward the buggy. As it turned out, Daniel behaved through the service, and nothing more happened to make Clarence or Lucinda stop bringing the boys to service. Aunt Grace invites Ma for a day. Michigan, 1890. Lucinda Freese learned several years ago that she had siblings that had been adopted and had grown up somewhere else. Occasionally, she'd received a letter from a couple of them. Over time, she was getting very anxious to meet her remaining siblings. As soon as she found out about her family through her brothers, Tom and Harry, she wrote to each of them. Then one day she received a letter from a remote town, and her curiosity grew greatly. She hastily tore open the envelope and was surprised to see the handwriting was very poor, like that of a child. She looked at the signature at the end of the letter before she read it and realized that it was from one of her sisters. "Dear Lucinda, I'm your sister Grace. Tom told me about you, and we should meet, because that'd be real nice. I want you to come and see me, because I can't come to you. I would have written sooner, but I have one child after another, and I have 4 children now. Here is where I live, on a farm east of you. You can take the new railroad. I would love if you would come see me soon. Let me know what the date would be good for you to come. Signed with love, Grace." The letter gave crude directions on the railroad line that led east into the state, and an address. The letter intrigued Lucinda because her sister had 4 children, just as she had. Clarence came home that night and walked into the house with a slight hint of exhaustion and working hard. Lucinda asked him how his day was, and he replied, "I've just started on a new house, and it needs to be done according to the schedule plans. It will have to provide us to be building all through the season." "But I got a letter from my sister Grace," Lucinda said excitedly. "She wants me to go to visit her on the train." "You've never been on the railroad before," Clarence smiled. "That sounds like a fine idea." Then Lucinda thought for a moment. "What about the children? Should we both go and take them?" "No, that'd be too expensive. We can't afford to go together. You best go by yourself." Lucinda frowned a little. "You'll be all right with me going on the train, then?" Clarence looked over the letter. "Oh, sure. The hired girl can watch the children while you're away, and I'll have more time to work on the house." "I don't want to have to worry about you all while I'm away." "You would anyway," Clarence smiled. "Well, now I have to write her back and tell her our plans," Lucinda nodded. Lucinda wrote Grace that she'd be able to come and make the long-awaited visit. She looked forward with much excitement to meeting her sister, and along the way that she wondered about her. She thought about what she would look like, and what kind of life she had. She felt very strange as the train left the station. Clarence's face and figure became ever smaller, until soon she couldn't see him at all. She began to feel lonesome, and then realized that this was the first time in her life she'd ever been on a train alone. Also, it was the first time she'd ever been separated from her Clarence and the children. She missed them already, and had a good mind to get off as soon as the train stopped at the next stop and go back to Greenville. She was rudely awakened from her daydreaming when the conductor asked for her ticket. She was about to look for it in her pocketbook when she realized that she was holding it tightly. She timidly gave it to the conductor, and then he checked it and saw how far she was going. He told her, "I'll let you know when you arrive, ma'am, and you'll be sleeping. I'll wake you before the stop. You can get ready." "I'll let you know when you arrive, ma'am, and then you'll be sleeping. I'll wake you before the stop so you can get ready." Sleeping? Such a possibility had never occurred to her. She had no intention whatsoever of nodding off to sleep in the countryside to look at, and then settled back into her seat to enjoy the trip as much as possible. It seemed to be hours of just riding, and after 4 or 5 hours, Lucinda opened her shoebox lunch she had carefully picked for herself and began to eat it. When she was finished, she very carefully put on the cover and tied it with the string that closed it again. She clasped her pocketbook very firmly in her grip and leaned just back to relax and close her eyes for a moment or two only. In what she thought was no time at all, she felt someone shaking her and awoke with a start. The conductor was very empathetic about it. She had reached the station, and she very slowly and sleepily got off the train. 2 people met her at the train, and since no one else got off the train beside her, they had no difficulty in recognizing their guest. When Lucinda saw her sister, she thought that she looked exactly as she thought she looked. She was dressed very unfashionably, and so was her husband. They were very plain people, with cheerful, weather-beaten faces, wrinkled from being hard at work out in the sun. Grace kissed Lucinda, and she returned it politely. Still, there was some hesitation. Her brother-in-law shook her hand uncomfortably. Grace and her husband were not used to meeting strangers. Lucinda sensed that she was a stranger right off, but she wasn't one to just speak to be heard. She had manners. Grace nodded. "That's right. I'm almost 2 years older than you. I reckon you're 27 and I'm 29. Tom sent me a letter telling me I was only 2 when we came to Greenville, and you were just born." She warmed up a little. "Our mother was 28 when she passed on during the journey, you know." "I didn't, but thank you for telling me," Lucinda replied. "So, my sister, what have you been doing with your... "I didn't, but thank you for telling me," Lucinda replied. "So, my sister, what have you been doing since you were raised someplace else?" "Not much to tell, Lucinda. I'm a farmer's wife. Have been since I left the Gleasons forever, about 16 years ago." Lucinda didn't know, but she was the age her birth mother was when she passed away. "Well, I'm a carpenter's wife. The town minister, Porter Smith, raised me. He's my father." "I wish I'd been raised that nice." Grace paused. "The Gleasons were awful mean. I left them when I was 14. Ran away to the Ordmans, and John here promised to marry me to keep me from the Gleasons." Lucinda looked startled. "That sounds shocking. You should tell me about it, because it sounds like an interesting story." "I promise I will, and I was 18 when I got married." Then she turned to John. "John, this is Lucinda." The sullen man smiled inwardly and looked much older than his wife, probably nearly 40 years old. "Pleased to meet you, Lucinda Fraze." He then took her bags to put them in the dusty lumber wagon. He seemed uneasy, not just around Lucinda, but around anybody. Lucinda had a feeling that she was a bit too overdressed in her fashionable dress, and seemed that the plain-looking Ordmans were a little taken aback at her at first. Grace and John Ordman were simple farmers, and dressed with no extra elegance. Lucinda, in contrast, made nice fashionable dresses that made her look elegant and well-to-do, but just for special occasions. "No, we managed to make do." Lucinda felt a little ashamed about her melancholy thoughts about her sister's attire, but shook her head a little to shake the thoughts out. "I learned making finery from my mother." Grace had big brown eyes and wild black hair that seemed to fly in all directions. Her hair had never been dressed properly, and looked as though it had just been fortunate to have a comb quickly run through it, once a day. Lucinda could not help but wonder what her sister would look like if she'd been all dressed fancy and elegant. She thought she could look very nice as it was, but she knew she was going to like her. John wondered why she hadn't climbed into the wagon yet. "Are you going to just stand there?" Lucinda composed herself. She'd been thinking about the clothing, and an unidly old lumber wagon. Well, the horse looked sturdy, save for the spray of chicken feathers all over, and the boxes stacked in the back. It looked capable of transporting anything. Lucinda was displeased with it because she assumed it was used for exactly that, moving everything, and never cleaned out. Oh. Oh, I was just thinking, she nodded, and then climbed into the wagon. Grace climbed into the high wagon easily, and okay, Paul, let's get going. John nodded and cracked the reins smartly. The horse didn't even huff as it began to move. Grace began to rattle off people, places, and events in her past. But the noise of the wagon rumbling along turned most of what she said into a cacophony of noise. So that over yonder is old man Jensen's place, and that's the Potawatomi territory, but I don't know why it's called that, and so on. The long and tiring ride to the farmhouse was over at dusk. John drove the horse expertly, and brought them to their destination without a problem. Lucinda wondered what John's full name was, but didn't ask. She assumed he was called Paw affectionately, and that she could call him John. When the Ordmans reached their destination, they kindly helped Lucinda down from the big wagon seat, and then Grace began pulling packages out from the boxes of the wagon. She took Mother's suitcase out first. And set it on the ground, and then called to Pa in a cheerful voice to hurry and help her get the stuff to the house. He seemed so anxious to please, for Lucinda was quite touched by his attitude. As soon as they began unloading the things from the wagon, 4 children came running breathlessly out of the house. Lucinda Freese was so astonished she was almost breathless herself, for she saw that one of the little girls looked exactly like one of her own. Why, your little girl looks exactly like my little doll, Lucinda smiled. Oh, John returned. That's pretty astounding. Grace hugged her children and escorted them into the house, with Lucinda not far behind, and John with the baggage. Even though the Ordmans hadn't tidied up their own clothes or hair, they had given each of their 4 children a bath the day before, so they were clean for company. Grace didn't have a hired girl, so she had the oldest child working for her, and she had John also helping. It was obvious to Lucinda that the children were accustomed to taking care of themselves because, as the children talked, they did chores to prepare for supper, including setting the table, dusting, and making sure things were picked up and tidy. In a short time, supper was ready, and it was pleased Lucinda. It was obvious to Lucinda that the children were accustomed to taking care of themselves because, as the children talked, they did chores to prepare for supper, including setting the table, dusting, and making sure things were picked up and tidy. In a short time, supper was ready, and it pleased Lucinda immensely when the oldest girl asked the blessing at the table. Clarence always did that at her home, Lucinda noted. Lucinda thought that she would have Little Doll do the blessing when she got back, as it seemed to her that this is a nice idea, that it seemed natural and beautiful, and it made her proud. Her 2-day visit was most pleasant. Grace and John were nice folk, and they were very pleased to have her over. Her 2-day visit was most pleasant. Grace and John were nice folk, and they were very pleased to have her over. They parted ways with kisses and affection and joyful tears. They told each other that they would visit one another now and then, and after they met, but it was to be many years before another meeting. They would each have 5 more children at the time of their next visit. Later, when Lucinda was home again, she told Clarence and the children her sister Grace's story, just as she told it, and the family was amazed to hear it, as surprised as she was. And when he heard the unusual personal history of the little orphan girl, who, like the storybooks, lived happily ever after, she admitted that she had never met a more cheerful or loving person than Grace Ordeman. The story of Aunt Grace. Lucinda Freese returned home from her visit with her older sister Grace, who married young but didn't have children until much later. The circumstances of her life were so strange to her that she told her family all about it when she got home. From her earliest recollection, Grace had been the Gleasons' hired girl, although to say that she was so was understatement. She was nothing short of their personal slave. She wasn't paid anything, and she was neglected since her arrival. They mistreated her just as they did themselves and their children. Old man Abe Gleason and his irate wife Penny would tell her to be grateful that she was taken in, being orphaned, and left abandoned as a child. The Gleasons told me I'm not their child. The Gleasons told me I'm not their child, and that's good, because they're terrible to their own children. And she thought it was just as well, since they mistreated their babies also. One of the jobs she has to do was a daily washing, which for some girls in those days was a normal chore, but not at 9 years old. However, in her case, she was told to do washing for everyone, even guests, and to do it over, Penny Gleason decided it wasn't good enough. She was told to stand upon a rickety chair to get to the huge washtub, which was too tall, and the bar of laundry soap was always slipping down into the scalding hot water. She would have to retrieve the soap each time. She had at times huge baskets of clothing piled up too high to be done by one person, and not once did Abe or Penny tell her it was satisfactory. Grace wondered why at times she didn't go to school at all, because the Gleasons said so. She didn't understand why they sought to make her do endless scrubbing, cleaning, washing dishes, washing clothes, and gardening. Her only respite was to know she didn't like living there. Her slovenly and lazy keepers demanded she call them her folks, even though she wasn't theirs, when company was present. They whiled away their time, mostly then yelling at her, and telling her what to do, and how to do it. Most of the taunting was Penny's doing. It was getting so that nothing was clean anymore. So after a while, when she was done, dirt and grime would cake back on to everything she worked to clean up. Every year, Penny Gleason bore a baby. Grace thought every successive baby more ugly than the previous ones, and she hated all of them. Her bitterness was mostly held inside, as any protest would have been with punishment. The whole family was always dirty, so was everything else in the house. The house had no screens, so flies were so numerous, and covered the walls and the furniture and the occupants. The latest and homeliest baby yet was sitting on the floor, trying to chew on a big piece of bacon rind. Penny said it was supposed to be good for her to cut her teeth on. She had grease all over her face and hands and clothes, and the flies were eating the rind with much success, as was the baby. As the black pests began to cover her, she started crying loudly, but her own mother was out for ignoring her. Grace was growing taller, and with each passing moment more impatient, longing for freedom. She could stand up to the washtub without a stool. She thought of the endless days she had done the same thing, over and over. The sink was always piled high with dirty dishes that had to be washed and dried and put away as soon as the washing was done. She looked at the room full of small children and saw that Penny was picking berries in a field, far from the house, ignoring her own children. She was far off that she thought it would be a long time before she returned. The babies and the other children began whining about needing something until it became garbled noise to her. She looked at the pile of dirty washing to be done, the stack of dirty dishes all around her, and made her decision. Well, I'm going to get out of this place. The Gleasons expect me to do all their chores. Don't do anything but yell. The little children are old enough to talk after me around too. They're crying for me to do everything. She went upstairs to her room and looked carefully around for a long time. She sat on the foot of her bed trying to think, but she was very sad and troubled. The dirty, tumble-down bed in her room heightened her sadness, for that she could not sleep. Babies crying made this impossible anyway. Her battered dresser had a cracked mirror, which distorted her face, and it was dirty. The whole room was a mess. But then she caught sight of the tattered curtain at the window, which was dirty too, and contemplated running away. She knew there would not be a better time to do it. Then she ran down the stairs, turned to the entryway, past the crying baby covered in lard, and left. Nobody was following her at all. She escaped without so much as even a protest. Running away had been so easy that she hadn't considered what to do after that. The only thought in her mind was to get as far away from them as fast as possible. The sun was hot as the day advanced, and it became a burning heat. The thin soles of a pair of what passed for shoes seemed thinner as she paddled on her way. Suddenly, it startled her to think that she had not eaten it all day. It was now nearly noon, and the hot sun was burning her feet, and her body was so overheated she thought she was burning up. She looked around for a shady place to rest, but there was none. She walked on and seemed to be in a daze. Finally, she came to a great patch of shade and collapsed. It seemed to her that the sun was never that hot, and she wondered if she could go on. She felt dizzy, tired, and thirsty. She saw a spider crawling on her leg, and was too hot and tired to brush it off. She just let it crawl around and around on her leg, crazily. She noticed an anthill by her hand, and she thought there must be millions and millions of them. She said, "They have a home at least, but I don't." She put up again. She got up. She got up again and started off down the hot and sandy road. She didn't know how long she had been walking. As far as she hadn't seen a single person. Suddenly, she heard a horse trotting on the dirt road behind her. She turned around and saw a horse and buggy. A young man was in the buggy, and he stopped to say, "What's the matter, little girl?" Instead of answering, she cried for quite a while. The young man was so upset at the sight of a child in obvious distress and misery that he didn't say another word until she finished crying. Then he very kindly asked her, "What's the matter?" "I ran away from my folks, only they're not. They hired me as their servant girl for as long as I can remember, and only told me to say they were my parents. They're Abe and Penny Gleason. They didn't even come after me." The young man just listened for a moment, and then he said, "The Gleasons? They're that old couple over yonder. I heard they're real mean." "They are," she nodded. "I'm not a little girl. I'm 14 and real strong. I was wondering if you needed a hired girl. Please, I don't want to ever go back to those people." "I suppose that'd be fine." The man helped her into the wagon. "Ma could use a hand around the house." And at his invitation, she got into the buggy. "I'm John Ordman," he smiled, realizing that she was probably a pretty girl if she had a clean face and clothes and her hair washed. "So, Penny Gleason's a real devil." John jiggled the reins, and the old buggy began to move. He thought that she had nice eyes, dark and brown. It didn't bother him that she was running from those mean folk, and he thought it was a good idea. Grace was delightful, and Grace was delighted with her companion, and therefore either of them realized it. The horse had turned in a side road. The blazing sun made her sweat terribly. As soon as she knew it, she was standing on the dusty earth before a small yellow farmhouse. John gruffly slapped down the reins and got out of the buggy. Then he tied the horses to the hitching post. "We're home. Come this way." John led Grace to the farmhouse. She walked inside. His mother was making some pie, and smiled up from her bacon, and nodded. "Who is this, sonny?" "Why, this is Grace. She ran away from old Gleason's." Old Mrs. Ordman smiled at her. "Now, dear, you'd better get washed up. You're filthy from running around all over town. A person can get sick of heat in this weather." She tended to her new guest with kindness, such that Grace was taken aback at first, and nobody ever treated her kindly. After Grace explained her story and got her all cleaned up, the Ordmans promised not to tell the Gleasons anything if they happened to come by. Old man Abe Gleason told his wife that he was fed up with not having his daughter around, even though up until that point he hadn't ever called her that. "I know where she's been hiding all these 2 weeks. I'm going to go there and fetch her from 'em." Penny Gleason had a baby in one arm, and she was ignoring it. Other babies and children were tugging at her. She almost kicked one of them out of the way, but composed herself. "You do?" "Yes, old Miss Ordman's got our daughter held at their farm. I'm going to go over there and get her, and if they give me trouble, I'll get the law on 'em." Penny nodded. "You go right ahead, Pop." Penny nodded. "You go right ahead, Pa. I'll be back with her by sundown." "Yes, sir, I'll go fetch her right away." Abe turned gruffly and left. His motivation was clearly not of love or worry, but quite the contrary. Abe turned gruffly and left. His motivation was clearly not of love or worry, but quite the contrary, as he needed her to do the chores he always neglected to do himself. He hitched up his horse and buggy and rode off into the dusty afternoon. Grace was dusting dining room chairs, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Old Miss Ordman and her son had been so nice, and she didn't know how to cope with it. Mrs. Ordman was sorting eggs when a loud knock was heard at the door. Grace heard the door being opened, and then she heard his voice. She dropped the dusting rag and quaked in her shoes. It was no mistake that the man was Farmer Gleason, and he was furious. Grace quickly ran out the front door and into the field, looking for John. He looked up from his plowing when he saw her, and he knew something was wrong. Grace quickly ran out in the front door and into the field looking for John. He looked up from his plowing, and when he saw her, he knew something was wrong. Grace told him that her father was after her, and asked what to do. "I can't go back. I can't, she wailed. John replied, as a matter of fact, "You come with me, and we'll get to this right away." And then they went back to the kitchen. The farmers looked at each other with malice, and the older man spoke first. When they got back to the kitchen, the farmers looked at each other with malice, and the older man spoke first. I've come for my daughter, and I'll get the law on you for stealing her." He then began waving the horsewhip he carried, very belligerently. John walked up to him and calmly said, "Listen, you old buzzard, you abused this poor child for the last time, and you'll never have a chance to do it again." "What do you mean?" asked the old man. Then the young farmer looked at him straight in the eye and replied, "I mean that I'm going to marry her," he said, "and nothing you can say or do will stop me. And now you can get out, and I never want to see your ugly face again." The old man walked on and never returned. When he was gone, John walked over to his mother. "Mother, what do you think about it? Don't you think Grace would be a nice daughter-in-law?" "Yes, I do," she finally spoke. "But in these here parts, she's still a little young to be married. You have to wait a little while." John walked over to Grace and said, "Well, I guess it's all settled, and we can be married whenever you say. In a few years." Then Grace, with no words of love or affection, promised to marry John. In a short time, they were married. Well, 4 years later. But it took a long time for their marriage to produce any semblance of mutual affection. She had been through too much of an ordeal. Grace was almost 2 years older than Lucinda. So when Lucinda was married at 17, Grace was 19, and had her first child already. Curiously, about the same time Lucinda had her first child, Grace was on her second, and there was a gap for a little while. Other children followed as she went into her early 20s. John and Grace couldn't have started out in love, but had to mature into it. Once Grace turned 18, it was easier for his family to accept their marriage, and it was no longer out of convenience or to get away from the past. Grace eventually found the kind of love she never knew before, and it took time for her to mend and accept it. It was not until her first child was born that she began to see John as her friend, not just her husband. So by the time Lucinda met them, they had a mutual respect and understanding, an unconditional love that admired. It would be many years before Lucinda saw Grace again. By that time she had 9 children, and Grace also had 9. Estelle is born. Greenville, Michigan, summer 1896. Well, roughly June 1896. Each passing year, Lucinda thought she might go to see Grace again, but hadn't been able to go to see her. 6 years had passed her by before she thought about it again, and promptly decided not to. She could wait for the following year. It was summer. A blistering one at that, and she'd just given birth to her 6th baby, a girl. The Freese family had 6 children, which was not uncommon in those days. Grandmother Amanda Freese and the midwife had successfully brought the previous 5 children into the world. She had the help of several good neighbors, women, and the community for them, for the 6th birth time. Grandmother was worried, and Dr. Beck was called in. Grandmother had told them that the baby was a fine, blue-eyed girl. She then left the fairly quiet. Grandmother had told them that the baby was a fine, blue-eyed girl. She then left the family quite perturbed as to how they would pay Dr. Beck, as he was charging the outrageous sum of $10 to deliver the baby. The Freese were very short on cash, but the demands of the constantly growing family did not seem to bother them. They just felt that when God gave you a large family, he would also help to provide for them. It did seem that the larger families just prospered as they went along. Most families were considered small if they had 5 or 6 children. In Greenville, they knew of one family with 12 children, and another with 14, and they lived there too. They looked up as prosperous. They were looked up as prosperous. They were looked up to as prosperous. "The Lord will provide" was one of the most popular biblical quotations. Birth control was unknown, and sex was the most shocking subject imaginable. No one ever discussed such things in mixed company, and should anyone verge on the subject, he would be promptly squelched with such words as, "Shush, the children are listening," or "little pitchers have big ears," and so on. When they moved in, let's go back to the guys. They're kind of narrating the story is what they're doing. That's what they're kind of doing. Yeah. When they moved into the house, the Freeses had Daniel Porter, Little Doll, or Elva, and Pearl Esther. The first boy born in the new house was named Lee Oliver, and he was husky, as the house was big. He had black hair and blue eyes, exactly like Clarence's. Then there was Roy Bartlett, as opposite to Lee Oliver as possible. He was not husky, was blond, and very frail-looking. He caused his parents a lot of anxiety in his infant stages. The 6th child, the new infant, was just named Baby. One bright Sunday afternoon, a few months after Baby was born, the family decided to go out for a ride in the horse and buggy. Since there wasn't enough room for all of them to go, it was decided that the 3 younger children would stay at the house. Their grandma, Amanda Fries, would look after them. Their grandma, Amanda Fries, would look after them. She was the school teacher from earlier, but as an old woman didn't wish to retire gracefully. Their grandmother, Amanda Fries, would look after them. She was the school teacher from earlier, but as an old woman didn't wish to retire gracefully. She wanted to keep doing what she loved. When they returned that evening, the 3 youngest children were all crying, and Grandma Fries told Lee Oliver that he was a very naughty boy indeed. What an afternoon she had! Everything seemed to go wrong all at the same time. First, the baby had dropped and broken her last and only bottle. She was hungry, and there was no way to feed her. The 2-year-old, Roy Bartlett, had broken several pieces of china. And then to cap the climax, the 4-year-old, Lee Oliver, had climbed up a chair so that he could reach the dishes in the big china cabinet. The largest platter, the turkey platter, was in 1,000,000 pieces all over the floor. Lucinda gave her son a long lecture, and among other things, she said to him, Now God sees you all of the time, and he knows everything you do, and he knows when you're a bad boy. Did you break the platter? Oh no, Mama, I didn't break it, he said. Grandma done it. Now, Sonny, you know Grandma didn't break Mommy's great big platter. Did you do it? No, I didn't break it. Grandma done it. Now, Sonny, you're a bad boy, and God knows everything you do. Now you must sit in the corner in the stairway, in the dark, and when you are ready to tell the truth, you may come out. So she put him in the stairway space behind the door, and told him he could rap on the door when he was ready to tell the truth. Some time later, a timid rap was heard from the door, so Lucinda rushed to the door. She was very pleased to think that her son had made up his mind so soon to tell the truth. Lucinda opened the door and asked, Are you ready to tell the truth now? He answered by saying, Mommy, are you sure God sees all the time and knows everything I do? All right, said the little fellow. If God sees me, I done it. But if he didn't see me, then Grandma done it. When the blue-eyed baby girl was born, Clarence decided to name her after someone very special. He thought about it a long time, but never mentioned it to Lucinda until the time came when they felt a name should be chosen. Permanent. They had been calling her just Baby for quite a while now, and Dr. Beck had been urging them for the Christian name so that he could have the births officially recorded. Clarence told Lucinda about his dead sister, and how he'd like to name the baby after her. I was a boy when my sister died. Her name was Estelle. She meant the world to me. She even wrote me a poem I've kept all these years. He handed her the yellowed paper. Lucinda smiled at the poem. Oh, I see she was really important to you, Lucinda replied. I made a promise to her before she died to name my daughter after her. So what do you think? Lucinda wasn't superstitious, but it bothered her. It just doesn't seem right to name a baby after a girl who died when she was only 16. What if she dies at 16 too? No, I don't like to name her after someone that died that young. My sister had the ague, he said. She doesn't. She won't have it, in fact. I bet she lives a long time. Well, if it really means that much to you. Yes. Well, Lucinda said, I guess it'll be all right, if you say so. And I'll be a little worried about it, but if you want, I'll call her Estelle. And so, with that, the little Estelle became the joy of her father's life and was his special pet. Every time she would laugh or smile, he saw his sister all over again, and a great feeling of peace and happiness came over him. His heart felt warm. Little Estelle was curiously similar in appearance to her long-dead aunt, and as it turned out, Grandma Fries came over and told them that she looked a lot like Estelle. That's a fine name for her, as she looks just like my Estelle as a baby. Lucinda then decided it was a good idea to have a baby named Estelle, after all. Estelle means star, of course. Yeah. Grandpa David Fries. Clarence Fries's father, David, became Grandpa Fries, and he took great delight in entertaining the children with stories of the old days. The children called him Grandpa. Grandpa used to tell them ridiculous things, such as that he had thought people would would be able to fly right in the air someday. He said, "Do you know someday they'll even be able to fly clear over the ocean?" Then everyone laughed, and because they did so whenever Grandpa was telling them one of his yarns. One day, one of the children found an old silk hat, which looked as though it had been hidden away for a long time. One day, one of the children found an old silk hat, which looked as though it had been hidden away for a long time. When they told their grandpa about it, he was quite concerned, and told them to put it back where they found it. He told them to never touch it again. He knew the history of this hat, and knew that it was one of Clarence's keepsakes, and that Grandpa really got startled. He told the children that his father Daniel had been the original owner of the hat, and that he had never seen his father when he was outside without it on. He also always carried a gold-handled cane. "My father, who would be your great-grandfather," he said to the children, "was considered a pretty wealthy man. The prison back in my hometown of Auburn, New York, was built in 1816. And do you know my father made bricks? And he made the brickyards right in our backyard. All the bricks at the Auburn prison were made there. And boy, was my father proud of when he got the contract for those bricks. He said, 'The bricks I made will last 100 years.' Our home, naturally, was made of bricks, too. Real bricks. Yes, sir, we really had good bricks in those days. Yes, sir, and my old home where your father was born was built to last. I bet it's still standing in 100 years from now." Every room had a fireplace in it. We lived in the wing. The folks lived in the rest of the house. It was built on purpose for my family, and we had a schoolroom in the basement, just like there. The children loved to hear Grandpa tell the stories of the old days. The children loved to hear Grandpa tell stories of the old days. The prison was indeed built to last. Inmates within the prison would see the statue and wonder if one day they could see it close up from the outside. So this Greenville, Grandma Amanda Freese, Greenville, 1900. Amanda Freese was quite a remarkable woman in addition to being grandma to the Freese children. Years had passed, and she was seated in her big rocker, far removed from her old schoolroom in the basement. For the first time in many years, she realized she was getting old. In those days, 65 years old was very, very old indeed. For a long time, unknown to her family, she had been taking digititis for her heart. She knew her heart was playing her tricks, and only her doctor knew it was just a matter of time as to how long she could hold on to life. The last time she had visited him, he had assumed a graver manner than it was his wont with her. He had no idea that she suspected the truth and knew the meaning behind his gravity. As she sat with her eyes closed, she seemed to have the whole panorama of her life unfolding before her. She thought of the day when the whole town found out that she was a preceptor, back when she first became known as in Greenville in the 1800s. Preceptor. Interesting. Let me read that again, so it doesn't sound weird. As she sat with her eyes closed, she seemed to have the whole panorama of her life unfolding before her. She thought of the day when... panorama. As she sat with her eyes closed, she seemed to have the whole panorama of her life unfolding before her. She recalled with pleasure the special meeting of the school board, and it seemed only yesterday she was invited to attend. "There is a meeting of the school board Thursday at 8 o'clock in the evening to discuss matters of the utmost importance. Would you please honor us with your presence?" Yes, she certainly was going to the meeting. When she arrived at the meeting, she was introduced to the people who had so far not had the pleasure of knowing. The president of the bank took her in tow, and he was also the president of the school board. He said in his most pompous manner, "We have great plans for you, Mrs. Freese. Yes, great plans." Amanda seemed, for some strange reason, very unimpressed. Then they told her, "We are building a new fine high school, and the following year it would be ready for occupation." Then they told her, "We are building a fine high school, and the following year it would be ready..." Wow. Then they told her, "We are building a very fine..." Then they told her, "We are building a very fine high school, and in the following year it would be ready for occupation." The point at hand was that since you were a school teacher, and a very able one, would you be interested in taking the position of language teacher? They did not know it, but they came close to her heart when they mentioned... They didn't know it, but they came close to her heart when they mentioned languages. because she was a linguist of some ability. Her favorite and dearest love was teaching French, and she had thought that one did not have an education to amount to anything unless one could at least read a French bill of sale. Amanda was polite, but firm in her refusal of the position. However, no, I must decline the offer. They were baffled at her refusal. Well, if you change your mind. And she said, I won't, she replied adamantly. I won't, she replied adamantly. The board was obviously distressed, and then they offered her the position of principal of the high school. All right, then, we'll offer you the position of principal of the high school. For the recollection, no woman has ever held such an honorable position. They seemed to feel that they were offering her a great favor. And she said, no, I will not. She refused. But why? The board was again baffled. Then she told them, I have not now, nor ever had a desire to be a high school principal. I also have no intention whatsoever of teaching in high school. What I intend to do is what I have always done. I am a preceptor, and I am going to have my own private school. If you want to cooperate with me, that'll be fine. I know there are a lot of pupils who fail, and they can make up the failures by coming back to me to school in the summer. I shall tutor them on my subject, so any one of them will come to regular classes in the fall. She became very drastic and continued. Any of your adults who wish may sign up in my language classes. Any of you adults who wish to may sign up in my language classes. I especially like to teach French, and as you know, it is the fashionable language of the time. Always prepared for any emergency, Mrs. Freese then extracted from her voluminous handbag a large-sized bill of fare from the largest hotels in New York. How many of you can read this? She passed it around, and not one of them, including the bank president, could read it. Just as I suspected, she said, in the most benign manner. With a few condolences, she continued, You see, you all need lessons in French, and I will be glad to tutor you. Despite the fact that it never crossed their minds to go to any place where reading a French bill of fare was imperative, they suddenly felt the education were indeed incomplete. Greenville, 1900. Amanda Freese's clout extended into the political arena in town as well, and she liked to involve herself in town affairs. She was a strong advocate of the Republican Party, as thus the men in town who could vote regarded her as a great politician. And also, back in 1900, the Republican Party was different than it is today. Much different. Oh, yeah. She was not allowed to vote, as women weren't allowed to do so back then. But what she did was stand for what she believed in, and campaign in her own way. She would offer to go up and down the streets of town, waving her arms and speaking about the merits of high tariffs and free trade. Which definitely sounds like current Democrats, not Republicans. He was completely different back then. Yeah. In a sense, she taught civil government to adults, who she was given the opportunity. Men in town began to admit that she knew more about politics than the average man, and they would humbly admit this to their wives, if they happened to be present. Other women in town regarded her as odd, but not crazy. Suffrage, which is the women's right to vote, was something only for men in those days, so it was unheard of for a woman to be walking around, lecturing on the merits of the eventual day that women could vote. She wasn't afraid to speak in public. Women will have the ballot someday, and that would be made her blood boil when anyone told her that women and idiots would never vote. She was a political woman ahead of her time, both 20 years too early to enjoy the day that women could vote. It would be over a decade after her death before women indeed had the right to vote. Amanda took political hopefuls in town under her wing, and some of them aspired to be great. It was the Republicans to whom she took an interest at all, and, as a Democrat, she considered beneath her a notice altogether. One day, a young man approached her and said, I want to run for local office, but I've never made a speech in my life. I understand if you were very good at this thing, and I can pay you well. How about it? Will you make up some sort of speech for me? I'll just memorize it, and nobody will know the difference whether I wrote it or not. He seemed very sincere, and such a personable young man. Amanda answered immediately, I'd be glad to write up the speech for you. and you may pick it up tomorrow night." The speech was prepared on time for him to deliver it, and the young man was so delighted, he said, "If I get this office I want, I will never forget you, Mrs. Freese." The night came for the big political rally. The town men were in hand on the big Grange Hall. The town hall was ablaze with lights, and the room was filled with smoke, but it was not from fire, because they lit up torch lamps and stuff. They didn't. Yeah, they would have had, something like that. It seemed that everyone had big cigars or something else to smoke, and the main room where the speeches were was to be made was vile smelling, and it was obviously no place for a lady. When it was nearing time for the meeting to start, a young man was blocking the entrance. To his amazement, he looked up and saw a very tall lady who looked as though she might be his grandmother, and he said to her, "You can't come in here, ma'am. This is a political meeting." The woman, who looked as though she might be his grandmother, cast him a disdainful glance in her most school-teacher-like manner and replied, "Young man, step aside and let a lady pass." He stepped aside, and she passed right down the aisle, through all of the smoke and the smells, and sat down in a chair in the front row. Women were just not supposed to be invited to political at all. Women were just not supposed to be invited in politics at all, the men said. But this didn't stop Amanda Freese. It was unheard of for a woman of any disreputation to sit on a political meeting. But this lady was very determined, and no one stopped her. After all, she had a protege, and she had come to see him make himself proud. With the first beautifully written speech, at least she thought so. As the protege came out of the platform, he was obviously disconcerted for her presence, and he had to look several times to believe his eyes. There she was, sitting as immobile and statue-like, and looking about as cold. The men applauded and cheered as some of the mayor introduced the speaker. The men applauded and cheered as soon as the mayor introduced the speaker, and a wave of expectancy was now pervading the place. The men applauded and cheered as soon as the mayor introduced the speaker, and a wave of expectancy was now pervading the place. It came overbalanced over the thick smoke. Soon Amanda knew every word the young man was going to say, or at least thought she had, and hopefully in her... Since Amanda knew every word the young man was supposed to say, or at least thought she did, she sat very erect and in her begrudging chair. As one might guess, she was not supposed to be seated so unceremoniously, or even present, much less in the coveted front row. The applause subsided as the young man arose. He took a glass of water from the table, and took a taste of it, and put the glass down, and then he looked around. He gulped and then thought, "What in the world is that new word I learned? What is the word?" He became increasingly nervous and couldn't even begin. He was thinking, "What in the world is Miss Freese doing down there in the front row seat? I wish she'd stayed at home, where she belongs." He tried to begin his speech, and then he realized he was staring at Amanda, and gulped again and took another sip of the water. Finally, he started his speech. "As I stand before you on this," he was trying to think of that word. He thought of what it was he was intending to, and this must be it, he thought, and then continued, "As I stand before you at this rectum." That was all as far as he got. Then his speech ended with an abrupt cry of laughter. He must have said the word. He must have said that word wrong, or the wrong word, and he didn't know which. Everybody was laughing. Everyone was laughing. He knew he was supposed to say he was glad to be there, and he wished they all felt at home. Yeah, that was it. He wanted them to feel at home. What he said was, "As I stand before you at this rectum, I wish you was all at home." Amanda realized that he had reverted to his usual ungrammatical vernacular, and she had to laugh also. Amidst guffaws and cheers, the meeting became a bedlam and was broken up. That evening after the meeting, the young man walked directly over to the dictionary and hurriedly began searching for the word and found it. Rostrum. He tried to memorize for future references. As at the end of the political speech, the making for the young man, but not his career, as he was immediately and unceremoniously elected to the office that he sought. The townfolk liked his humility. That character is in the history books. It's now we'll go look him up. The rostrum rectum guy. Yep. Greenville 1900 as well. It's the same chapter. Amanda Freese was reminiscing to herself about her long years in Michigan. In the same year, she smiled as she thought of how many grandchildren she had. Think of it, she marveled. Here I am with only one son, and I have 9 grandchildren, and I've never dared to hope for so many, but there they are, and I love them all. In her mind, she indeed put them all up. It seemed that little Estelle was her lost daughter. Estelle all over again, and she knew what she had never really recovered from, the loss of her lovely child. Let's see, she was thinking, little Estelle will be 5 years old soon. I must go downtown tomorrow and buy her something. I hope she is going to wear the sunbonnet I made for her. She has such a lovely peaches and cream skin, and I wouldn't want any sun to be on her face. She felt tired as she rose from her chair and prepared herself a bed. Just before falling to sleep, she turned to her husband David. She felt tired as she rose from her chair and prepared herself for bed. Just before falling to sleep, she turned to her husband David. I want the horse tomorrow, dear. I'm going to hitch the horse up to the buggy and go to town right after school. There are some supplies I want to buy. Yes, I'm going to town tomorrow. The next morning, Amanda went about her duties as usual, with minimal effort. Her household duties had long since ceased to concern her, or to be much of importance one way or the other. When the dust was getting a little thick on the walnut furniture in the parlor, that was all right too. She prided herself as an educator and schoolteacher, and house cleaning was not only repugnant, but also trivial. It was just something to be done, and preferably ignored. As soon as she was restless, she would scarcely wait until the hour came for school to start. The schoolroom in the basement was her life, her love, and her being. It came time for school to start, so she went outside and gladly rang her. It became time for school to start, so she went outside and gladly rang the bell. She had a little school bell, which she used to summon the children from the big backyard, where they were playing. It was the same type of bell as those used all over the countryside. She rang that bell with pride and vigor at first, but then the tired feeling quickly took over, and she stopped. She thought it seemed the day would never end, and the first time in her life, Amanda realized that she was watching the clock anxiously. It was incredible to her that she couldn't wait until it was time for dismissal of the pupils for the day. All day time passed grudgingly slow, and she wondered why. Inside there seemed a voice was calling to her to make haste. The word hurry repeated in her mind. Those feelings were all quite confusing to her. Analytical and orderly mind. At least the day was over for the children, and Amanda Freese sighed with relief. She wondered, what is the matter with me? Despite her age, she was able to hitch up the high buggy and her horse, and began to ride the 1.5-mile road into town. She finished her errands as fast as her unfamiliar exhaustion would allow, and smiled to herself as she made her last 2 purchases, a bag of candy and a very beautiful drinking glass. The decorative gold markings on the glass made it look too fancy to drink. It was decorated in fancy designs of gold and green. She placed her 2 purchases on the buggy seat beside her, and giving the horse a smart whack with her buggy whip, she was quickly on her way toward home. Before going home, however, she planned to stop at her son's to visit the family for a while. When she neared the home of Clarence Freese, she saw a little girl running out as fast as she could toward the house, and she was not wearing her sunbonnet. As soon as the horse and buggy stopped in front of the house, several children swarmed around it and came down the walk, with little Estelle having hastily put on her sunbonnet, tied around her chin. From Grandma here. Okay. I've been a good girl, Grandma. See? I put on my sunbonnet. I always wear it, like I promised you. Grandma Freese looked at her first and didn't comment. She looked rather grim, and the children didn't know what to make of such a look on her usually pleasant face. The children all loved her, but they sensed that she was not like their grandma that day. Following her into the house, they waited for her to say something. Grandma Freese seemed so sullen and rambled unintelligibly. She looked so sullen and sad, and they knew something was very wrong. She spoke first to her mother and said, "Now, Lucinda, I hate to say anything to you, but I have a strange feeling that something is going to happen to me tonight. I have a premonition. God is taking me to his heavenly house, and that I will soon be with him in a mansion in the sky. She spoke first to their mother and said, "Now, Lucinda, I hate to say anything to you, but I have a strange feeling that something is going to happen to me tonight. I have a premonition that God is taking me to his heavenly home, and I will soon be with him in a mansion in the sky. This premonition is so strong, and I want to take Doll, my granddaughter, home with me, now that she will be handy to run down and let you know how things are in the morning." Lucinda was aghast and thought her mother-in-law must have suddenly lost her mind. A premonition? She never had such things. Suddenly, grandmother wasn't superstitious. A woman of her education and understanding. It was so overwhelming, though, that Grandma looked as though she actually meant what she had said. Lucinda had trepidation in her heart, and said of course Doll could come with her, but she said she was sure everything was going to be all right. She refused to take too seriously what had been said. Doll was a big girl now, 15 years old, and being the eldest granddaughter, she was chosen to accompany her home. Just before Grandma got into the buggy, Grandma turned to little Estelle and said to her solemnly, doesn't look fine. Just before Grandma got into the buggy, Grandma turned to little Estelle and said to her solemnly, "Now here on this seat of this buggy is a present I bought for you this afternoon. In fact, here are two presents, and I'll tell you what they are. One is a bag of candy, and the other is a pretty drinking glass with gold and green on it. I am now going to give you them to your sister Doll. Hence, you did not tell the truth. I saw you running up to the house without your sunbonnet on, and Grandma feels very badly, and sorry that you're such a naughty girl." With those words, she started up the horse to ride away, and the buggy went down the lane. She was gone. She was never seen alive again. The next morning, bright and early, Doll ran panting to the house. She had run all the way home, and was so breathless she could hardly talk. When she caught her breath, she began to cry out loud to wake up the house, and soon everyone came into the front room to see what the commotion was. The Doll sobbed and said, "Grandma's dead! Grandma's dead! Ah, sorry, it is awful. She made a funny noise in her throat at 5 o'clock this morning, and Grandpa got up real quiet, and he lit the lamp, and when he got over to the bed again and looked at Grandma, she was dead already." Deep gloom fell over the house that midsummer day.
Fair roses around its sculptured form entwined, and grace and beauty seemed combined. And so I gazed upon its beauty more. I wondered why so many passed it o'er. But oh, that form so beautiful to see soon made its hidden sorrows known to me. Thorn lay beneath the flowers and colors fair. Sorrowing I said, "This cross I may not bear." So it was with all these around, not one to suit my need should there be found. Weeping I laid each heavy burden down, and my guide gently said, "No cross, no crown." At length to him I raised my saddened heart. He knew its sorrows, bade its doubt apart. "But be not afraid," he said, "but trust in me. My perfect love shall be shown to thee." And then with lighted eyes and willing feet, again I turned my earthly cross to meet. With forward footsteps turning not aside, for fear some hidden evil might betide. There and prepared an anointed way, listening to hear, ready to obey. A cross I quickly found of plainest form, with only words of love inscribed thereon. With thankfulness I raised it from the rest, and joyful acknowledged it the best. The only one of all the many there that I could feel was good for me to bear. While I trust my chosen one confessed, I saw a heavenly brightness on its rest. And as I bent my burden to sustain, I recognized my old cross again. But oh, how different did it seem to be, that I had learned the preciousness to see. So what he loves seems good of me to send. I'll trust it best because he knows the end.